Tiff, over to you.
Okay, I won't talk on for too much. I'm happy to kind of take the lead from everybody else in terms of kind of what's happening with you and your trust and your trustees and the approach that's been taken over the last few months. But I just wanted to kind of give some initial thoughts just in terms of probably what most trustees and most of your chairs are dealing with right now, which I'm sure you can imagine, because it's quite a very weird role anyway to be chair of a trust, particularly when you have a growing number of schools and you're a volunteer and you have this tremendous amount of responsibility and liability and accountability that's sitting on your shoulders. And you also have a day job and families and everything else. And, you know, you're trying to learn as much as possible about your trust, your schools, education, what does this all mean? And you know, just the daily things that might come up, which you're all having to deal with anyway outside of COVID, in terms of complaints that arise or any safeguarding concerns, looking at restructuring issues and any particular issues that come up, and just managing that normally is quite a lot. And then of course, as with everybody on this call, you throw a global pandemic into the mix and suddenly, you know, it takes over every minute of your day, which can be quite daunting, particularly when it's not actually your day job. It's just, you know, a volunteer role. And every time we have kind of a crisis situation or anything strange that comes up, I always tell our CEO Nick, like, do you remember when you first asked if I would run for chair? Because he had tracked me down in the car park and he said, you know, I'd really like you to run for chair. I think you ask really good questions. I think you'll be able to figure it out. I need somebody who's going to challenge me. And I said, oh, I don't know. I don't really know anything about it. I have no idea how any of this is. And I said, I don't really know what's involved. And he said, you don't have to worry. You know, you'll figure it out as you go. And it's only a few meetings a year. So every time something comes up where it's suddenly taking over all of my time, I like to remind him that this is not the few meetings a year that he sold it as. So it can be quite tricky managing it from that. But in terms of the way to work effectively, I think first off, and now it's kind of late if you've not already had that kind of relationship built before the crisis hit, but certainly having a really strong relationship with your chair and with your entire board is really important. And that doesn't mean being all cozy and everything, but it is much like your executive team within your trust. It's being able to have those open conversations. It's about being able to have that kind of psychological safety, to be able to ask the difficult questions and to really come up with solutions together. So I think we've done a lot of work on building those relationships over the last few years, so that when this hit and when it was coming down the line, we were kind of not prepared, because nobody was really prepared for this, but we were able to respond effectively, as effectively as possible. And I think some things to just think about are being able to signpost your trustees with really good information. I don't know how active your chairs are and how involved they are in education, because it can differ. So myself, for instance, I'm making sure that the trust board is fully informed, but it's not just about making sure that they have whatever the latest guidance of the day from the DFE is. It's signposting them to the different arguments as well, in terms of what that means and what that should mean and what that could mean. And I think I have to be quite careful as well sometimes, because I'm quite tempted to send all of the trustees, you know, all of these different articles saying why this guidance from the government is ridiculous. Whereas I think it's much more helpful if I'm providing a measure of guidance that's quite balanced, in terms of, well, actually this isn't so bad because of this, and just helping to signpost them to save their time and to help build their knowledge. I think it's really important as well to separate emotion from facts, and I think we're all having to struggle with that through all of this and with all the decisions that we're making. And it works on both ends, because I've spoken to a lot of trustees where their CEOs have been, you know, very emotionally opposed to wider openings or different areas, and then other trusts where it's been the trustees, because the CEO and the executive have been all gung-ho, ready to open the doors, they want the kids back in, and then the trustees are much more reticent. So it's just kind of remembering that there's a need to separate the emotion from facts, and that there's no right answer. So just because you may disagree with your board on the level of wider openings or what to do, I wouldn't see it as a point for falling out on. I think it's really important to remind the trustees as well, particularly if there's kind of strong viewpoints across the board, that it's really decisions being made on the balance of available information for our schools. Because when you're looking at the SAGE advice, when you're looking at independent SAGE, when you're looking at this talking head versus that talking head and everything, and it's really about the best possible information and how to use that for your schools. And discussions around why, and having really open discussions. So for instance, last night we were having a meeting because one of our schools, they're all doing different things. Some of them have nursery back, some don't, etc. They're all primaries. But all of them are not prepared to take more children back between now and the end of term, whereas one of them is very keen to bring everybody back on a rota system. And so it got into quite extensive conversations around the benefits of that, early years development, what that means for that particular school and those particular parents, and how the comms would work with that particular group of parents, particularly as some of those year groups are already in full-time at the moment. And now what the school is proposing to do is to take back some of those days so that they can move to this rota system for all pupils. So it's about having really thorough conversations around that, and keeping your board updated as well frequently. So what we're doing at the moment, and what we've been doing since just before COVID, when it was starting to become clear something might be coming down the pipeline and we might have to close. We've been having weekly meetings. They're not taking up loads of time because we're very conscious that we're not taking up the CEO's time, but it's just kind of sometimes even 15, 20 minutes, sometimes an hour or so, just looking at what is happening in the schools, what are the head teachers wanting to do, what is the feedback that we're getting from parents, and we're doing a weekly risk register as well. We have our overall risk registers for the schools and the openings, but this is a separate, really short, very, very brief one where the heads look at it each Friday, assessing based on what's happened in the past week, what's coming up to the next week. So we can have very quick conversations on the Monday in terms of, do we need to continue in this vein? Are we ready to open to more pupils? Do we need to cut back at all? So we're just constantly getting that flow of information so that we're constantly kept in the loop with what's happening. But again, making sure that it's as short as possible because everybody's time poor and we don't want to be draining on the executive with it either. I think it's really important to share comms with them as well. So not necessarily maybe running everything past them beforehand, but when you do send out letters to parents in particular schools and stuff, send those onto the trust boards as well, because it helps to give them a view of what the different schools are doing, how they're communicating with their parents and their communities, and just really helps to keep them in the loop without you having to reiterate all of it so much. And I think maybe it's quite difficult because I know as trustees and particularly as chair, one of my huge concerns always outside of this is around well-being and, you know, the emotional and mental health of our CEO. And certainly that's something I've been absolutely focused on in the last few months. But I think sometimes it's really helpful to check in on the chair as well and just see, are you okay? And I know that you're doing it with your executive team and your heads and everybody else, and you know, can be a bit overwhelming, like one more person to ask if you're okay. But actually it does make a huge difference, because Nick will call up every now and then just to see how I'm doing, how the board is doing, and just to gauge those levels and to make sure that I'm practicing what I preach as well, because I'm always talking to him about, you know, he's so resilient and he's so adaptable, but actually there's a difference between resilience and self-care. And I think in education in particular, people really forget about that self-care element, and it's so important. And I think sometimes, I know as a chair who's constantly immersed in it as well, I forget that, even though I'm constantly saying that to him all the time. So I think it's really good to be able to have that conversation between the chair and the CEO, and just kind of maybe nudge some of the other trustees sometimes as well, just to see how they're doing, and have you checked in with the chair and that sort of thing. Because I think that really, really helps. And I would just say as well, the best way to utilize trustees is not in generally, but in particular with this, it's not just to present them with information, it's not just to get things rubber stamped, but it's really accessing their expertise and valuing that so that they're quite comfortable and open and ready to share their expertise with them. And I think particularly in the last few weeks, we have an early years researcher on our board. So her insight has been really, really crucial into terms of bringing back nursery reception in year one and what that looks like, and and how should we be supporting those pupils. I'm in communications myself, so I work with a lot of trusts around their communications, around stakeholder engagement, so parent letters, crisis communications, things like that. So, you know, they've been asking me, you know, what should we do? How should we respond to this? And I've written a few as well in my spare time, just to help facilitate those communications. And I think it's really important as well, actually, for parents that they're not just hearing from the school, that they're hearing from the CEO as well. And that's not necessarily with every single letter that comes out or every single update. But if you're not already kind of making that link between the trust and the parents, it's really helpful to be able to provide that information and say, this is what we're doing as a trust. This is how we're working with our schools. This is how the schools are working together, and kind of sharing that trust-wide approach, even though each school may be doing something different. And I think just really keeping those conversations open. You know, I think probably if you're not already calling your chair, I think most chairs would be quite open to you just picking up the phone and just spilling everything that's on your mind. I think hopefully everybody on here has that sort of person that they can pick up the phone to, but it really helps to be able to do that. And I think having that from somebody who's not on your executive team but who knows the trust, so that trustee relationship, that really makes a difference in terms of being able to support you and your mental health and well-being through all of that. I hope that was kind of I didn't want to say too much because I wanted to kind of get everybody's insight into how they've been working with their trust boards and their chairs during all of this.